Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for joining us again today. Well, we've got something different for you here today. In this video, I've been wanting to cover, since the channel started, we've been wanting to get into more of the handgun basics and safety. And because I think it's one of the most important questions you're going to have to answer, the first video we're going to be doing is on how to select a concealed carry handgun. And there's going to be differing opinions on how you go about this, but I think that no matter what your level of experience is, you're going to find that these are very good questions to ask yourself, and it's a safe path to find the right thing. We're going to get into that in just a minute. All right, once again, welcome back. Thanks so much for being with us. If this is your first time coming to the channel, or if you've been watching our videos and you just haven't had a chance to do so, and you like our content, please consider subscribing. You can locate that subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner of your computer screen there, or if you're on a mobile device, you can scroll down below the video, and you can hit subscribe that way. It's a real simple thing that helps us out a whole lot, and we really, really appreciate it. So, today we're going to be talking about how to select a concealed carry handgun. Well, and one of the very first things we're going to talk about is if you're asking somebody that question, their answer shouldn't be for them to point at what they're carrying, say like this nice Beretta, and say, well, you need to carry this Beretta because it's super accurate, it's great, you'll love it, it's the best thing you can carry. No. The first thing that anyone should tell you if they're really trying to give you the correct advice is to go to the range. And I'm going to tell you why. Now, coupled with going to the range, you absolutely need a good instructor. You don't just need to go, you need to go with someone that you can trust. Now, not everyone lives close to a good range that's well stocked, and I understand that. And you may have to take your path a little bit differently on how you make this journey and find the right place. But whoever you end up doing this, it could be someone who's got good military training, it could be someone who has a good law enforcement background, who's a good shooter, it could be someone who's a concealed handgun instructor. There are a lot of people out there available that can do a good job in training. But there's a lot of things you're going to have to consider about what makes the handgun a good choice for you. And you need someone who is competent and safe with you while you make those determinations. Now, I brought this one out for a reason first, because the very first thing we're going to talk about is size. Size makes a big difference in whatever you're going to be selecting as a concealed carry handgun. For a lot of reasons. You know, number one, and like I say, we're going to cover individually about the different actions and calibers and things of that nature, but a lot of people will pick up a handgun, and the minute they place it in their hand, they know something's wrong. You know, the handgun is just not a good fit for them, and they know it. And like, this Wilson Combat's a mighty fine firearm. I like it quite a bit. It fits my hand pretty well, and I've got, you know, medium to large size hands, and I think it's a great weapon, but it is a little large. Because in addition to how well it fits your hand, it has to be something that you can control well. And let's just say that, you know, due to physical limitations that you have and people with hand strength issues, things of this nature, they may not be able to comfortably handle a larger weapon. Okay? And then, of course, there's that obvious question of, you are talking about a concealed carry firearm. Well, your ability to actually conceal it, you got to have it in a holster. Somehow you have to carry this weapon with you, you know, concealed. And you may start off trying different things, and you may, for example, like something like the Beretta. But this gun might be just way, way, way too big for you to possibly carry. And, you know, that could be part of how the process begins on you looking at other things about smaller guns. You know, maybe you like a semi-automatic, but something a little bit smaller, and maybe you went down to a slightly smaller, you know, Glock, something a little bit thinner and lighter. There's no telling how it's going to happen, but you definitely have to consider size as one of your first considerations. Okay? There's tons of different ways you can carry your firearm. There's modern holster technology is fantastic. So there's a lot of different ways that you can make any gun work. But that doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. So make sure that whatever you start off with is something that's going to make sense for you, because it will be a carry gun. So next thing we need to talk about is the action of the firearm. Well, like the little Beretta that we were looking at a minute ago, this particular firearm, and we'll do a quick safety check on it here. You can see that it's empty, and you can see there's nothing in the chamber, there's nothing in the firearm. Okay, right now, whenever I cock the slide there, you can see that the hammer is back. Now this is a hammer fired. That means that this hammer, when I pull the trigger, will drop and hit the firing pin, just like that. Okay, now notice that right now the hammer is tucked away nice and neat inside. And when I pull the trigger, you'll see the hammer start to come out. And then once it reaches its breaking point, it'll fire. So that complete sequence I just did was a double action shot. Okay? The trigger brought the hammer all the way out, and then it released and took the shot. Now, if I had fired this weapon, what you would have is after the first shot, the hammer would still be cocked like this, and it's now in single action mode. If you notice, the trigger is also cocked. So it's going to take less effort now, just a little bit of effort, and it fires in single action. This is what's known as a double action, single action, hammer fired handgun. This has some other features as well. This particular one here, you can see it's cocked to this lever right here. This is a safety. When you push it up, it can't be fired. If you bring it down, you'll see the hammer fall, because it'll decock. You'll see the trigger and the hammer both go back to normal. That's a decocking lever. You don't see those on a lot of handguns, but it is just something to be aware of. So double action, single action on this little USP compact. Now, you take something like this little SIG P938. Let me show you that this is also safe and clear. Okay. So you take something like this. This is single action only. So I could sit here and pull this trigger all day long, and you can see nothing is happening. All right. It's just going to sit there. Well, if I cock this hammer first, and then I come in here and pull the trigger, then it releases. Now, if it fired, of course, the slide will come back, and then when it comes back, it will be cocked again. And then all you have to do is let your finger off here to reset the trigger, and then you fire again. That is single action only. One of the advantages to a single action only, just like the very popular 1911, a lot of people like to carry this with the hammer back and the safety on, what they refer to as cocked and locked. Okay? So you have to ask yourself, when you talk about, your comfort zone with different things, do I want a gun that I'm going to carry with the hammer back and ready to fire, even with a safety on? Are you comfortable with that? Some people, sure. Some people, no. But it's one of those things you need to be aware of before you select your firearm, because if you're in an emergency situation and you have to get this out, you got to remember your fine motor skills are probably not going to be the best in the world if you're in the unfortunate situation of having to use your gun. But when it comes out, you have to remember to drop your safety before you pull the trigger. And that's just one of the things that comes with that. Now, you've also got firearms that don't have hammers at all. You have striker fired, like this Glock. Basically, the Glock has got a mechanism on the inside that has a spring that's cocked, and you have a series of different safeties that keep the firing pin from being able to fire until the trigger and everything is lined up like it's supposed to be. So you can't actually see this fire, but you can see that we're safe and clear. When I pull the trigger, you will hear it fire. And then when you recycle that, you can let off the trigger, you hear it reset, and then you pull it again, and it fires. So, of course, one of the advantages to a striker-fired handgun is there's no hammer to get in the way or tangle in anything. And that's just another type of handgun, and the way it feels will be a little bit different too, which is something that you really need to experience to kind of understand. Pulling that hammer back, experiencing that hammer coming back and drawing is a little bit different feel than using a striker-fired handgun. And yet another difference that you will see will be when you talk about revolvers. We talked about double action. Remember on the semi-auto where you have a long trigger pull? Well, same thing. This is a 6-shot 357 double action only revolver. So when I pull this trigger, you can see I have to come all the way back to bring the cylinder around and take a shot, and I have to do this every time. They do make single action revolvers as well that will have the hammer exposed, where you can either click it back to put it in single action and take a shot, or after your first double action shot, you'll have single action just like you would in the semi-auto. So as you can see, differences in the way they physically and mechanically operate are going to give you an opportunity to ask yourself some questions about what you're comfortable with and what you think you'll be able to do, especially when your mental state and your nerves and your physical ability may be reduced because of stress. The next thing we're going to discuss is caliber. And people will argue with this, until they're blue in the face, and it doesn't matter what you say. If a person likes a particular caliber, then they're going to defend it, and that's okay. Like I say, we're not here to tell you which caliber to get. We're mainly trying to help you go through some logical steps to find out which caliber you should get. So whatever you end up deciding to get, it needs to be something that makes you happy, that you're comfortable with. Now, we were just showing you this little double action Smith & Wesson revolver. Well, this is a 38 special, okay? So this, for example, is a little 5-shot 38 special. It's a small handgun. Now, whether I'm using practice rounds or defensive rounds, and of course, if you're brand new to handguns, there's a difference between ammo that you practice with versus ammunition that you use for defense. The main difference being is most defensive ammo, instead of having a solid jacket over the tip, it has a hollow point that's jacketed that is designed to expand whenever it strikes an object in order to keep it from going too far. Defensive ammo is designed to stay in what it hits. It's a safety thing. A lot of people tell a lot of crazy things about defensive ammo, but the idea behind defensive ammo is that it will go and stay in the target. Okay? Now, this is a pretty comfortable gun to shoot, but you can step up to, revolvers that have a more powerful cartridge. For example, you could take a 357 Magnum revolver. Now, in the case of this Kimber, this is a pretty heavy revolver. So even though it's the 357 cartridge, which is more powerful than the 38, and this will also shoot the 38. That's just one of those things about 357. You can shoot 38 special through this as well. But when I shoot 38 special through this, it's not near as much sting on my hand as when I'm shooting 357. And by the time you shoot just one cylinder of 357 through this gun, well, you definitely feel it in your hands. And I've even tried, different grips. I've tried a rubber grip. I ultimately put the original grips back on because I think they were just as nice. And but you feel it. Okay? Now, and some people may be thinking, well, really? You're going to base your decision on whether it's got a little bitty sting or not. Well, no, not necessarily me, but maybe you. And maybe someone who's got, once again, they got physical limitations. They have issues with hand strength. They've got issues with hand pain. If you have a gun that they can shoot that doesn't put a tremendous amount of energy back into their hand, it's probably going to be a better choice, especially for people who are not, entirely comfortable because they're new in the first place. So they're going to be going for the most comfortable thing they can find. So obviously you want comfort, you want control. If you've ever watched footage of people shooting really high calibers, 44 Magnums and things like that, you can see that a lot of times the barrel's just going way up in the air. Their control may not be so good, just wildly shooting. Well, obviously you want something that's going to be able to be controlled as a concealed carry firearm. There's also a liability in there too, because if I am carrying a concealed carry handgun, I want to make sure I've got a caliber that I can use a good quality defensive round in that will do its job, hit the target, and stop. I don't want a round that is so powerful that I go through my target and potentially onto something else where it can cause more harm. You have to remember, if you ever decide that you're going to carry a concealed carry firearm, and hopefully you'll never need it, but if the unfortunate day comes where this ever had to come out of your holster and you have to fire it, you're responsible for every bullet that leaves this firearm. Okay? That's just realistic, and the laws are going to vary depending on where you live. We'll cover a little bit of that later. But you're responsible for every shot that you fire. So you want to make sure that the caliber that you choose makes sense from a standpoint of you being able to control it, comfort, and make sure you've picked a sensible choice that will not do more harm than good. The next thing we're going to touch on is confidence. And what we mean by this is we're talking about confidence in your ability to control the firearm, to shoot it accurately, and of course, confidence in your overall feeling about shooting and carrying a concealed carry firearm. We were talking about, shooting the 357. And in all the years I've been doing this, I've had a lot of people who, I have trained, or either trained or co-trained or been there to help lend a voice, try to help the community. And in doing so, a lot of people start off with one gun and they're just not comfortable. And they said, you know what, I've been shooting at 357 and I'm just not quite right with it. I felt like I did a better job with the 38 Special. I felt like I could control it better. I felt more confident. It's a very simple thing for me to operate, and that's what I want to go with. Well, that's what you want. Okay, if you go to the range, as I said, and you have a competent person with you, a lot of ranges have a lot of different firearms that you can rent and you can try them. And of course, if you have an instructor that has a good collection, they will often bring a collection of things as well if they train you privately. But that's the key and the purpose of going through as many different things as you can, because you have to find out, size, action, caliber. Can I do it? Am I a competent and confident, shooter with that firearm? And, another example, you may be one of these people that had your heart set on a specific gun just because you like them. A good example of this, I trained my father, and this was an individual who was not completely new to firearms, okay? But he had never really considered carrying, and it wasn't until, he just realized they were retiring, and he's like, you know what, I just feel like if we're going to go out and if we walk outside of our neighborhood, if we go any kind of distance at all, I'd like to have something. So, of course, I said, of course I'll help. So we trained, and after going through many, many, many handguns, he ended up loving the 1911. Now, a good 1911 is a wonderful shooting handgun. Okay, I don't think too many people will argue about how accurate a good quality 1911 is to shoot. So I said, okay, well, but I asked him about the other things too. You sure about the size and all that kind of, and the way it operates? No, this is perfect. It's perfect size for my hand. I love it. Okay. So we proceeded, and we trained on, not this one very close to it. This is my little TRP operator, but I used another Springfield, very similar. And it was a joy for him to shoot, and he made his decision. And he qualified with it, and we'll get to all that later. He qualified with it and got his license. And whenever he started carrying, it wasn't too long after that I'd met up with him a couple places, and I asked him, so what's it feel like to be carrying? He goes, well, I'm not carrying today. I'm like, really? Why not? And he goes, well, it's just so heavy. I mean, I got a good holster. I got a good leather and Kydex holster that supports all that weight. But, he's a smaller guy. And he goes, no matter what I do, I feel like I got this boat hanger hanging off of me. And he goes, I love the gun. He goes, don't get me wrong. This is definitely a gun I'm going to take to the woods with me. I'm going to take to the range with me. But I feel like maybe I got ahead of myself. And, so, well, do you like everything else about it? And he goes, yeah, sure. Well, so ultimately what ended up happening with him is he stayed with the same action, okay? Because once again, 1911, this is a single action only. You have to cock it and you have to pull the trigger. And you have a safety, okay? And you can carry it with the safety on. Well, because of everything he liked about the 1911 and that style, he ended up choosing the little SIG because it lets him do everything physically that he's confident in doing, but he's able to do it in a smaller gun that he was actually able to get into a smaller holster that he can carry easily. And so what'll happen sometimes is just that. You'll start off with one idea, and it could be a good one. Everything else might be good, but if you haven't really thought through that whole size thing, and see, that can affect your confidence. It wasn't long after that he, realized that, it's a good firearm, but it probably wasn't the best decision as far as something to carry. But he did end up in something that he was confident in. The other reason why I say this is that there are going to be people who are not a good fit to carry a concealed handgun. I mean, I've had people who have trained, they've tried lots of things, they've ended up coming to me and saying, you know what, I've tried dozens and dozens things in here, and no matter what I get my hand on, I'm just not, I don't trust myself. And I wanted to pursue it, and now I have my answers. And I've had some people that just ultimately said, I know I'm not a good fit. I know some people are meant to carry, but I'm not one of them. And you have to respect that if that's how you feel about yourself. So you have to be comfortable, and if you don't feel comfortable and confident, then don't feel like you have to do it, no matter what anybody else says. Okay, well, this list wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk about cost. So, a lot of people have this idea of picking out the perfect firearm and getting it just the way they like, maybe something custom, maybe a high-end 1911, or, it could be anything. It could be the nicest HK, whatever the case may be. These guns are not cheap. A Springfield like this one, I don't remember the exact price, but I think this was somewhere north of $1,500 for this one. And I have some others in the same kind of price range. Even something like this, HK Compact was around a $1,300 gun. Now, I don't take those kind of purchases lightly. And I'm not just, like every day, just buying one like that. That's a lot of money. And for some people, that budget is not going to apply no matter what. They're going to have to do something different. And if you're one of the individuals that's helping someone make the selection, or if you're the one who's making the selection, well, you want to make sure you try enough different types of firearms to get into something that kind of makes more sense. Like, for example, Dad ended up changing from this gun into the little SIG here because of size considerations. But at the same time, he also saved a lot of money, because even though this is kind of pricey for a subcompact 9mm, it was half the price of that 1911. This was about a little over $700, and that's because it had the night sights and these wooden grips. It's just a series. They made different series, and this one happened to cost a little bit more. But for some people, this may not even be in the budget, and that's okay. Like I say, once you try enough things and you find out what you can and can't do, a popular option with a lot of people may end up being a Glock. Because, depending on which one you get and where you go, whether it's a used one or a new one, $400, $500, $600, $700 you can get in a Glock, depending on what you get and what you put on it. And Glocks are, fundamentally pretty easy firearms to use. They're pretty easy to maintain. And there's lots of add-ons that you can get for the firearm. So I mentioned that, the purchase price is something to consider. Well, there's something else you have to consider too. Whenever we were talking about caliber, I mentioned that you've got these ridiculously powerful cartridges versus, a common cartridge. Well, if you're carrying 9mm, 9mm ammo is considerably less expensive than 44 Magnum. Okay? And so if you buy a gun like this, or any gun, you're going to want to practice. You don't just want to, do your search, get confident enough to get your license, and then never practice. That's a bad idea. So you're going to want to practice from time to time to make sure that you're comfortable and all your fundamentals are in place and that you really feel confident with the firearm. So whatever caliber that you choose, whatever gun that you choose, okay, that's part of your cost, is to practice. And then you have to think of one other thing when it comes to cost. And some people don't think about this at all. And that is the cost to replace it. Okay? It's my hope that not just me, but anyone who might be watching this or listening to this, that if you are a concealed carry handgun owner, that you never have to pull that handgun out. And if you do, hopefully you will never have to fire it. But if you do, that handgun is most likely going to end up in an evidence bag, and depending on what your local laws dictate, you may not see that thing for a long time, if ever. A lot of strange things happen, when that stuff gets taken into evidence, and if you did get it back, well, who knows what shapes it's going to be in. Well, so I think a pretty fair question to ask yourself is, if you had a, $1,600 custom Wilson Combat, and you had it taken away and it came back and it looked like it had been dragged down 5 miles of bad pavement, how upset are you going to be? Versus you get a Glock 19 back that you paid $500 for, and it's a little scraped up. Well, me personally, I wouldn't be that upset about the Glock 19 because, number one, I've got another one. And number two, there's not a whole lot you can probably do to hurt it anyway. It's not like it has any custom, finishes or anything super nice that I can't just replace. Even if they knock the sights off of it, I could put another set on in just a couple of minutes. So your cost to buy the firearm, your cost to practice on the firearm, and then your cost to replace the firearm should really all be considered, because in the unfortunate event that you have to use it, the replacement might be a reality. So we're going to touch just a little bit on legal requirements. And let me stress that we are not giving legal advice here. We're advising you to consult the proper legal channels that govern where you live. And let me kind of tell you what I'm talking about. Remember, this is all about selecting the right firearm. Okay, depending on where you live, there may be restrictions in your state that require you to have a certain handgun. Like, for example, this Glock 19 that I have in my hand has 15 round magazine, okay, and it holds one in the chamber. There are some places that have got laws against those higher capacities. And there's a lot of different stuff swirling around in legal and court decisions and things like that, but we're talking just generalities that you need to make sure that where you live, what you're looking at is something that meets requirements, okay, for ownership. And if it doesn't, you most likely won't be able to get it in your jurisdiction, but I'm just saying, you want to make sure it's something you can have. But then the other thing is, you want to make sure that whatever the qualifications are for getting your handgun, that you consider that in your choice. And let me tell you what I'm talking about. So, in the state of Arkansas, just for example, if you go to get your concealed carry handgun license, and of course there's also different categories in Arkansas. There's your basic license and your enhanced. But however you qualify, if you go to get your handgun license and you go in and you do your shoot, you actually physically qualify with a revolver, okay? That is all you can carry. Now, that's the state of Arkansas. So most people are encouraged to train and be able to fire a semi-automatic, because if you qualify with a semi-automatic, you can carry whichever one you want. Okay, so most people can fire a semi-automatic if they can fire a revolver. So, and if you're a revolver person, it would be worth it to train a little bit on something that's very forgiving, like a Glock 19 or similar. There's a lot of other handguns in this same category and size. But in the state of Arkansas, you would need to train on this if you want to be able to carry both kinds. Now, once again, states vary. So make sure that whatever you do, that you consult with the rules that are going to go along with that. And of course, if you're using a good instructor, like I said, you're with a competent person at a good range, if you find a concealed handgun licensed instructor, they're going to know all these things. They can tell you exactly what you're going to want to do and exactly the best way of going about that. So that goes back to having the right person to show you what to do. So to kind of summarize everything we've talked about, just want to give you a couple of stories here that are kind of examples of how we may have started one place and ended up another. I told you that when it came to firearm selection, I've had people that start off with, one gun, ended up in another. My own father started off with a nice 1911, ended up in a little SIG, but the action, the operation of the handgun was essentially the same. There's a lot of people that I'll train for the first time that someone has just told them adamantly, you need to get a Glock, you need to get a Glock. Glock 19 is the best thing you can carry. And a lot of times they would have already bought a Glock 19, and they brought that with them to the range to start training for the first time. They didn't listen to anybody else. They just said, okay, he said Glock 19. And they get to the range and they shoot the Glock 19. And for some people, for whatever reason, that may have not been the best choice. Maybe they have, smaller hands. I've got several people that I've trained with on the Glock 19 that after they shot it, we ended up moving them into a slightly smaller Glock, like this 48. Okay? On the outside, as far as the outline goes, it's basically the same size as the Glock 19, but it's a single stack. And so it was a lot easier for them to get their smaller hand around this gun. And of course, it's got some other slight differences because, the little Gen 4's got the finger grooves and this is flat. But the bottom line is they tried both handguns and they ended up in the smaller one because that's the one that they were the most comfortable with. And as a result of it being more comfortable, they were a better shot. And it ended up being the best choice. Now, I've had other people who yet took it a step further. They went down a little bit further to like the 43X. And plus this individual, they had shot a 43X briefly somewhere, I think at another range before they started training. They kind of liked it. They tried the larger gun, but ultimately they came back to the little 43X, and it was their absolute favorite. And so they started off with one idea, but they ended up in something else that made more sense. Of course, Glock has got a lot of different options. I've had many people that ended up in the little baby Glocks too. They start off with a 19 and end up in a 26 or a 27. For me, I have a 27 handy. This is a 40 versus a 9mm, but you get what I'm saying. The 26 is the baby Glock version of this. So I've had people make this transition all the time just because the smaller gun ended up being the gun that made the most sense and felt the best in their hand. And at the end of the day, that's the most important thing to consider. So when you find your good instructor, when you find somebody you trust, of course, if they don't spend some time on, basic firearm handling and safety and range info and all that, if they're not even going to cover that stuff, of course, you're in the wrong place. But a good range will have all of that. There'll be lots of safety in place. There'll be lots of people there to make sure that you're safe. So find a good person to train, look over the size, what type of physical controls and action, the caliber, train with it until you are confident. Doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. If you're not confident with the firearm, you don't want to carry it. Make sure it makes sense for your budget, and of course, make sure you check on your local regulations. And like I say, your journey is always going to be a little bit different. My spouse looked at many, many, many firearms, and even she ended up starting with this and ultimately ended up in something like this. And she did so because it had the fewest question marks for safety. There's no hammer, easy to operate, not a whole lot to think about, and it's a caliber that she was able to handle and she has hand strength issues. So she ended up in something that was a good choice for her because she followed the steps and she didn't stop until she found a thing that was the right fit for her. All right. Hopefully, having said all that, you can go forward with this information and actually make a good decision. And once again, let me stress, if you go to anybody about this, and if they don't suggest the range first, you've got the wrong person to talk to. Don't take an individual firearm recommendation from anybody, because it's not a one gun solution for everyone. You've seen how many different variables there are, and you need to address all of them. All right. We sure thank you for being with us again today. Be back soon with another video for you. Until that time, as always, everybody please be safe and have a great day. Thank you.